John and to the seven churches. And the reason why this fifth seal in verses 9 to 11 would have been so meaningful is that it showed what John and the churches were to expect. It showed what John and the churches were to expect. Listen to Revelation 6:11. Revelation 6:11 says, "It was said unto the martyrs that they should rest yet for a little time, until their fellow servants also and their brethren, who should be killed even as they were, should have fulfilled their course." Let me repeat, Revelation 6:11. "It was said unto the martyrs that they should rest yet for a little time, until their fellow servants also and their brethren, who should be killed even as they were, should have fulfilled their course." John and the seven churches were to expect what? They were to expect possible martyrdom. Now that's true of all Christians. If you ever face the fact, you are to expect possible martyrdom. Often the question is asked, suppose the communists would take control, what would happen? Well, you're to expect possible martyrdom. That's true of all Christians. But certainly some would face that more clearly than others would. One reason I love this, I love to compare Revelation 6:11 with 2 Timothy 3:12. 2 Timothy 3:12 says, "Yea, and all that would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution." 2 Timothy 3:12, "All that would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution." Not some that would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Not most of those who would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. But all who would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Now it doesn't say all who would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer martyrdom. But all Christians face the possibility of martyrdom. And many Christians, more than others, do face the possibility of martyrdom. I also like to compare Revelation 6:11 with Matthew 6:34. Matthew 6:34 says, "Be not therefore anxious for the morrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." That's very different from what the world says, and it's very different from what so many professing Christians say. The idea is, cheer up, most of the things you dread never happen anyway. You know that idea. Probably you've said that yourself, but that isn't what Jesus said. I wonder if you've ever come to a passage like Matthew 6:34 and been a little bit disappointed and thought, I wish you'd said something different. I wish he said, after all, it won't happen anyway, so cheer up. No, he doesn't say that. He says, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. The Bible is not a book of pessimism. The Bible is not a book of optimism. The Bible is a book of reality. Oh, how we need to face that in our lives. In Revelation 6:11 and Matthew 6:34 and everywhere else, the Bible does not give false comfort. One of the greatest snares of the ministry is the snare of giving false comfort. You preachers, review your own past lives. And if you're at all honest, you'll see, as I've had to see, how many times, without realizing, you've given false comfort to people. No, the Bible never gives false comfort. You'd probably be shocked also if you knew, and if I knew, how many times we have accepted false comfort for ourselves. The giving of false comfort is a very common sin among Christians. And the acceptance of false comfort is also a very common sin among Christians. Well, the Bible never gives false comfort concerning anything. So that's one answer. You could give many answers to this. You see why I keep asking this question. What would the contents of chapter 6 or chapter 7 or chapter 8 have meant to the Apostle John and to the seven churches? Because it keeps you from being a futuristic futurist. You say, oh, that's off in the future. Well, it must have some meaning for the seven churches right now. And it must have some meaning for the Apostle John right now. I told you last time that I'm a present tense future. I want to be. And that's one great value of Joseph Sykes' commentary on Revelation. I have it in 3 volumes. He is a premillennialist, and I'm almost sure, I've got to check it again, but I'm almost sure he is pre-trib. And I'm so glad he is, because folks would say now post-trib might do more on this than others. Well, regardless of whether that's true or not, he's a premillennialist and he's a pre-trib. But he's a present tense premillennialist. He brings it down to the present time. And one of the simplest ways to do that is just to say, what would this have meant to John and to the churches? You see, you don't have to enter into some of these disputed things. In a class like this, I mentioned them. And I know to some of you, they're just terms at the present. But at least you can see their different views. But often you don't even need to mention the different views. Just ask, you know that all of Revelation was for all the churches. Well, what would it have meant to them? It was all for the Apostle John. What would it have meant to him? That brings us to this disputed question in chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 about the meaning of the white horse. This is the first of the 7 seals. The rider on the white horse is a symbol of the success of a preached gospel. Now, post-millennialists in general would hold this. F.B. Meyer, whom I quoted here, is not a post-millennialist. He's a premillennialist. Some premillennialists would hold this in a different way. Now, there's a passage in Matthew 24:14 that may teach something similar to this. And that is that this gospel of the kingdom, Matthew 24:14, shall be preached in all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. Not that all the world will be converted, but it shall be preached in all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. Many premillennialists hold that. They don't hold that distinctive idea that that's the Jewish remnant during the Great Tribulation period. But regardless of that, I can't accept that first interpretation. And the reason I can't accept it is that the 7 seals, other than this first one, are all seals of judgment. And the 7 trumpets are all trumpets of judgment. And the 7 vials are all vials or bowls of judgment. So you see, you have this standing alone by itself if you hold that first interpretation. And therefore I don't accept that. Then the second is the rider on the white horse is Christ, who goes forth conquering and to conquer by his mighty judgment. Now Seiss, in his commentary, argues for that in great detail. I respect his view, but I've never been able to make it my own. And the reason is that the Lamb is presiding over what happens in all these seals. And you see, if that's true, according to his interpretation, then the Lamb is presiding over Christ. And that seems to me to be a very unnatural interpretation. A great many premillennialists take this third view, which I believe to be correct, that the rider on the white horse is the Antichrist. And if so, you see, the rider on the white horse of Revelation 6, 1 and 2 is different from the rider on the white horse in Revelation 19:11. And you got the final conflict between the rider on the white horse and the rider on the white horse. One is Antichrist and the other is Christ. Now remember what that word Antichrist means. Not just against Christ, but it's stronger than that. Anti is the Greek preposition instead of. Instead of Christ. That's the final great Antichrist. Mention to discuss anything you believe to be absolutely clear about the rider on the white horse. Now I follow this rule. I give you oftentimes different interpretations. And then you ask, well, I don't know which one. Mr. Sells holds this or somebody else holds a different interpretation. I don't know. But often you can rise above that difference. Not evade. I don't evade it when I discuss it briefly, but rise above it and say what's absolutely clear. And the thing that's absolutely clear is that the rider on the white horse is under the sovereign control of the Lamb. Now that's very clear when you relate chapter 6 to chapter 5. He is under the sovereign control of the Lamb. A principle which I've found helpful in the study of Revelation is this. Compare what Revelation teaches about the end time, Antichrist, and other parts of the end time, with the earlier parts of the New Testament. And the reason is that the earlier parts of the New Testament, such as 2 Thessalonians 2, the man of sin, 1 John chapter 2 and chapter 4, the Antichrist, and Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, reveal these things in simple, matter-of-fact language. Revelation reveals them in what we call apocalyptic language, figurative language. And of course, one difficulty you have in the study of Revelation is this: how much of this is figurative and how much of it's literal? Well, interpreters differ on some of those details, because you know Revelation uses a lot of figurative language. Well, is this figurative or not? I think a lot of people think some things are figurative in Revelation when they are, and maybe vice versa. Well, how are you going to determine? One of the simplest ways to determine is take 2 Thessalonians 2, the man of sin, the Antichrist. 1 John 2, 1 John 4, the Antichrist. And especially Matthew chapter 24, the Olivet Discourse, Christ's great sermon on the second coming. Because there you have it given in plain matter-of-fact language. And then you bring that plain matter-of-fact language over into the study of Revelation that uses apocalyptic language. All right, the thing that's absolutely clear about the rider on the white horse is that he's under the sovereign control of the land. And don't forget the principle. Don't keep your eyes primarily on the contents of each seal, but on the one who opens the seal. The Bible just keeps emphasizing that. And you won't be too confused if you keep your eyes where the Bible fixes your eyes. But really, it took me years before I even saw that, but it's right there in Scripture. In every case, the Lamb opens the seal. The Lamb opens the seal. God doesn't repeat himself unnecessarily. The repetitions of the Bible are just as inspired as the words of the Bible. On page 33, notice the meaning of the fact that under the fifth seal, the martyred saints cry out for God's vengeance. What great truth, which is very important for every Christian to grasp, is emphasized by the fact that the martyred saints cry out for God's judgment. Explain your answer clearly and in detail, and in your study read carefully in its context. Revelation 6:10. The martyred saints cried with a great voice, saying, "How long, O Master, the holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" Now, those words, "how long," are often used in the book of Psalms, and they were two of the favorite words of John Calvin. John Calvin lived in those stormy days of the Protestant Reformation. And of course, one thing that grieved him so was that many of his fellow Christians were being martyred by Roman Catholicism. No, he was concerned for them, far more than he was for himself. And that's one of his favorite prayers. How long, O Lord? How long? How long? Well, the martyred saints in heaven cry out in the same way. I'll give you the great truth I see here in two parts. The first part is that the desire for God's avenging justice is not a sinful desire. The desire for God's avenging justice is not a sinful desire. It's a normal desire. It can be applied in a sinful way. I can sin in my desire for it, having a wrong way of applying it. But the desire for avenging justice is a normal desire, not a sinful desire. See, Hebrews 12:22 and 23 speaks of the spirits of just men made perfect. Hebrews 12:22 and 23, the spirits of just men made perfect. You see, these martyrs in heaven are the spirits of just men made perfect. And they desire vengeance. They desire vengeance. Well, you know that's not sin. They're not sinning when they desire vengeance. No, this is a normal desire, not a sinful desire. Revelation 6:10 is one of the keys that helps to unlock the imprecatory passages of the Old Testament. An imprecatory passage is a passage in which God's servant prays for judgment, God's judgment. We think especially of the imprecatory Psalms. You find other imprecatory passages. One, of course, is in Nehemiah. Nehemiah prayed an imprecatory prayer for God's judgment. And you You say, is that sin? No, it's not sin in itself. That desire is a normal desire, not a sinful desire. That's the first part of the statement. The desire for God's avenging justice is not a sinful desire. And that's a great key that helps to unlock these imprecatorial passages of the Old Testament. Then the second part of this truth is that the desire for God's avenging justice must be committed to God. The desire for God's avenging justice must be committed to God. The glorified saints couldn't take the matter of avenging justice into their own hands. They'd already been killed. They'd already been killed in the presence of the Lord forever. They couldn't take the matter of avenging justice into their own hands. Go back to David in the Old Testament. He could do it. But you see, time and again he didn't. Why, he could have killed Saul. And he could have killed many of his enemies. He could have taken avenging justice on his son Absalom, but he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And you see, that's the spirit of the imprecatorial Psalms. Somebody says, how cruel. No, the point is, it's all committed to God. Now that shows we have to be careful and obey Matthew 7:6 in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 7:6 says, cast not your pearls before swine. You see, you have to be careful how you preach things like this to the masses of people. Because they get the idea, well, it's right for God to do it, so I'll just help him out. No, that's the opposite of the spirit of the imprecatorial Psalms. The spirit of the imprecatorial Psalms is commit that judgment to God. He'll do it in his own way, and when he does it, he won't violate anything. If I take it into my own hands, my own control, I'll violate everything. That's why you have to be careful how you just preach these things to anybody. Because if you preach the imprecatorial Psalms to the masses of people, you might have some murders that would take place. Well, the imprecatorial Psalms didn't cause that, but your own presentation of it may cause it. My own presentation of it may cause it. One thing you have to keep in mind when you teach is how you're going to be quoted to people later. And of course I know no matter how careful you are in explaining something, you're going to be misquoted. It almost has to be misquoted if it's taken out of context. Because you give something in a context. And you can't just always say, now when you give this to others, be sure it's in context. You try to do it. You're going to be misquoted. But I tell you, I'm more careful than I used to be about what I say, because I say that could be taken out of context, and taken out of context, it could do tremendous harm. All right? The great truth I find in this prayer of the martyred saints, their prayer for justice, is the desire for God's avenging justice is not a sinful desire, but it must be committed to God. He's the one who avenges, and he takes it in his own hand. How to gain the greatest profit from the study of chapter 6. If someone would say to you, I don't seem to gain much profit from my study of the 6 seals in chapter 6, show briefly and then in greater detail how you would seek to meet his need. Now, I've already given some suggestions. My main suggestion is keep your eyes on the Lamb. He's presiding over it all, and he's not merely prophesying it, but he's fulfilling it all. He's fulfilling it all. That's the main suggestion. I want to give another additional suggestion, and one reason I love this is that it not only applies to the 6th chapter, but to this great section beginning with chapter 6, 6 to 19. 14 chapters of Revelation, 6 to 19 inclusive. And here's the great prophecy of the future, and you say, what is it referring to? All right, study chapter 6 to 19 in the light of God's unchanging character. Study chapter 6 to 19 in the light of God's unchanging character. We had someone in the class a week ago. He's not here tonight. He's gone away, but he had a question about this at the end, and I think a very good, legitimate question. But he said, I thought all this was prophesying the end time, and we're applying it to the present. Surely. And it's in terms of God's unchanging character. I am the Lord, I change not. Psalm 7 verse 11 helps me to understand this. Psalm 7:11 says, God is a righteous judge. Yea, a God that hath indignation every day. Now, see, you say one day, the day of grace is going to be over. Then the day of judgment will come. There's a real truth in that. But be careful, there's an overlapping of those things. We're in the day of grace now, we're also in the day of judgment. And the day of judgment is going to come, but there's going to be the day of grace too. One great verse that we'll come back to over and over in the study of the trumpets and so forth will be Habakkuk 3:2, that great prayer for God's people in the Babylonian captivity. In wrath, remember mercy. My, that's a marvelous prayer. In wrath, remember mercy. Over and over again, you just come back to that. And you say, God's judgment is going to be poured out. Yeah, but there's mercy here. There's mercy here. You see, there's overlapping between those two things. And does God hate sin now? Every bit as much as he will hate sin during the Great Tribulation period in the future. Indeed, he does. See, it's the unchanging character of God. Therefore, you have wrath, but you have mercy. And you have wrath, but you have mercy. Those are overlapping things. Now, notice how different futurists explain chapter 6 to 19. A futurist is one who says, Revelation, climax is the whole thing points to the time of the end. I believe that with all my heart. Points to the time of the end. But they're futurists, and they're futurists. And sometimes I like to say they're Baptists, and they're Baptists. You know, some Baptists say one thing, and some Baptists don't go all the way with that. And they're Presbyterians, and they're Presbyterians, and they're Methodists, and they're Methodists, and they're futurists, and they're futurists. I told you last time that some futurists starve me to death spiritually. I come and I want something for my soul, and I'm living today, and they put the whole thing off the future. As far as I can see, it doesn't have any relation to prayer. Just when you look to the future, you don't know how distant it is or how nearby it is. But it's just future. Well, I want somebody to bring it back to the present. And I told you that's one reason why I love the commentary of Joseph Sykes. He is a present and future. All right? Now, some futurists would say chapter 6 to 19 are pointing to the great tribulation period, the time of the end. And I would certainly go along with that, the great tribulation, the time of the end. Now, other futurists would say Revelation 6 to 19 describes nearby events which climax in the great tribulation period. Now someone says, is there any authority for holding that second view? Yeah, I think the main authority for holding that second view is the Olivet Discourse, Christ's great sermon on the second coming in Matthew chapter 24. You may remember that earlier I gave you a little diagram. What is the key to understanding Christ's sermon on the second coming in Matthew 24? There's your thickly shaded crown, the second coming. It all refers to second coming. But inside that, we write 70 A.D. And that is that the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. See, just 40 years from the time Christ gave the prophecy has a nearby fulfillment. It's a partial fulfillment. Some would say now part of Matthew 24 refers to 70 A.D. And another part of Matthew 24 refers to second coming. I think the correct view there is not that one part refers to one to the other, but two are woven together like that. It's what we call double reference. And I believe that that's one great key to understanding Revelation. You see, Matthew 24 gives these prophecies in plain matter-of-fact language. Revelation gives the revelation in apocalyptic language. So you bring your plain matter-of-fact revelation right over into the other. And if the ascended Lord follows the same pattern that he had followed in the days of his flesh, that's what you'd expect all the way through. So there are the two ways in which you would interpret this as a future. You'd say all the great tribulation yet to come. Nothing now. No. Nearby events are days. If anybody were to ask me that question, do you believe we're in the last days? In my own mind, I would give 100% answer. I'd say, yes, I believe we're in the last days. But I wouldn't always say it to them, because what they mean is different from what I mean. What they mean is, do you believe that we are in the last part of the last days? We may be and we may not be. I don't know, see. But I believe you'll find that the New Testament uses the expression the last days for this whole period between the death of Christ and the second coming of Christ. The whole period is the last days. Are we in the last days? Yes. But when people ask, are we in the last days, this is what they mean. Are we in the last part? And you know, I become a prophet if I say, yes, we are. Well, signs may point to it. They may not point to it. But at the same time, I'm very careful how I handle it. But it's that whole period of the last days. There's a striking contrast between Daniel 12:4 and Revelation 22:10. Daniel 12:4 says, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the word, watch, and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Daniel, seal the book until the time of the end. That's Daniel 12:4. Now listen to Revelation 22:10. Revelation 22:10. And he saith unto me, seal not up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. You see, was Daniel prophesying the latter days? That's the expression used often in Daniel. He was prophesying the latter days, but Daniel was not living in the latter days. And he was sealed up the book. He was not living in the latter days. John was living in the latter days, and he was told to seal not up the book. Someone would say, well now, Matthew 24 and much of Revelation is predicting earthquakes. And you come to Revelation, you say, how much of that is figurative language? Well, some of it isn't, because Matthew 24 shows that it's not all figurative. No, it's a literal earthquake. Jesus makes that clear. You say, well, since we've had earthquakes all along, how could earthquakes be a sign we're coming more and more to the time of the end? I don't know how many of you are familiar with two fairly recent books of Eric Sauer, S-A-U-E-R, on the progress of God's plan of redemption. He has one volume on the Old Testament called The Dawn of World Redemption. And he has another on the New Testament called The Triumph of the Crucified. And he really has some tremendous material in those two books. Eric Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. He was a European teacher. I think he must have spoken, I think he wrote it in English. I don't think it was translated into English. But it's really a very wonderful book. The Dawn of World Redemption on the Old Testament, The Triumph of the Crucified on the New Testament. And he's talking about earthquakes. And he says, during the last 3 centuries, the frequency of earthquakes has increased constantly. 1600 to 1700, 4 great earthquakes. 1700 to 1800, 7 great earthquakes. 1800 to 1900, 9 great earthquakes. And then he said, 1901 to 1925, the first quarter of the 20th century, 4 great earthquakes. And then he lists those 4 great earthquakes. Of course, the greatest of those was the Japanese earthquake of 1923. Oh, 230,000 people died in that. That's one of the greatest, 1923. But you know what a seismograph is. A seismograph is an instrument that registers the intensity of earthquakes. And there's at least one out in California that can register earthquakes thousands of miles away. They say it trembles a great part of the time. Well, what's going to be the characteristic of the latter days? You see, in an increasing way, these judgments will take place. Every time you read of an earthquake, you say, oh, how tragic. Yeah, but we're one earthquake closer to the second coming of Christ. We don't know how close it is, but we're one earthquake closer. See, when I get the whole message of the Bible concerning these things. I have the whole counsel of God. Acts 20:27 tells us that Paul shrank not from declaring the whole counsel of God. Here's the way we often apply that. Acts 20:27. We need the whole counsel of God, not just this doctrine, but this doctrine, this doctrine, this doctrine. We need the whole counsel. Surely, that's part of it. That isn't the whole thing. We need the whole counsel of God concerning every subject that we're discussing. And oh, how easy it is. You take this one subject and you give just part of it. But the Bible doesn't give just part of it. The Bible gives the whole thing. And we need the whole counsel of God. And I'm going to illustrate that a little bit later in terms of the whole thing of abortion and the tragic thing that babies are being aborted. But that's only part of the truth. Part of the truth is that through abortion, millions enter heaven. If the Bible teaches universal infant salvation, I'm not trying to go into that to prove it or not. There isn't any absolutely clear passage in favor of it. And I think there's a clear reason for that. If God has just come out and said in so many words, every baby lost between conception and birth goes to heaven, why, it would have glorified infanticide. It would have glorified abortion. It would have glorified killing the baby in the prenatal state, killing babies after birth. And it's certainly of God that you don't have anything as clear as that. But the Christian consciousness in general has accepted it. And I accept that generally without an absolute proof. Well, if that's true, then you see, through abortion, millions enter heaven. Just could you imagine somebody in heaven saying to you, oh, I'm so glad that I was aborted. Because if I hadn't been, I'd have grown up and I'd have rejected the Lord. Somebody said, Mr. Sells is saying, abort babies. No, that's murder. God takes that into his own hand. But oh, what an illustration is of Psalm 76:10. Surely the wrath of man shall pray for it. And it's a wonderful illustration of Romans 5:20. Where sin abounded, grace is much more abound. Abortion is murder. But through abortion, millions enter heaven. More of that, we will come to it later. But you see what I mean? The whole counsel of God concerning any particular subject that you're teaching. And how could earthquakes be a sign of the end? We've had them all along. More and more, they seem to be increasing. And every time you read of an earthquake, your heart ought to go out in sympathetic love to those people. Remember, that's part of God's judgment. Ask God to make that a missionary earthquake to turn people to the Lord. And then to realize that that is a part of preparation for the second coming of Christ. All right, to summarize for a moment, how to gain the greatest profit from the study of chapter 6. Study chapters 6 to 19 in the light of God's unchanging character. God hates sin every bit as much today as he will during the Great Tribulation period. And Psalm 7:11, that's a great passage. God is a righteous judge, yea, God that hath indignation every day. He said one day the day of grace will be over. Yeah, in a certain way, but there's overlapping there. We're in the day of grace and we're in the day of judgment. There will be the day of judgment, but also the day of grace. Oh, I love that prayer of Habakkuk 3:2. We'll keep coming back to it in our study. In wrath, remember mercy. I remember years back when we had the Cuban crisis, and many thought that we were on the verge of nuclear warfare. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But many thought we were. And I know Dr. Fleece was very much concerned about what he read in the newspaper. And he made this statement in faculty meeting one day. He said, it may be that we're called to minister to a world under judgment. Suppose we do have nuclear warfare. You say, no hope. Oh, yes, in wrath remember mercy. In wrath remember mercy. And it may be that we'll need nuclear warfare to get us as a nation back to God. I don't know. So it says, but everybody be killed to it. No, not everybody be killed to it. Matthew 24, Jesus said there shall be wars and rumors of wars, but the time is not yet. The end is not yet, but the end is not yet. And so nuclear warfare is not going to end there. It is not yet. When our eyes are on the Lamb who presides over all, ruling the good and overruling the evil, oh, you see what a difference it makes. Are you, any of you just sort of dreading anything about nuclear warfare? Well, of course, some are saying we shouldn't have anything. And the public has been told on this. The public wants us to go on with nuclear preparation. I don't know what you feel about it, but I'm strongly in favor of it. Amen. That's the only thing the Russians will listen to. We just want to make it, let it be to their advantage to keep a treaty. The treaty won't mean anything to them. If you deny God, as they do, then your word is not to be trusted. If you undermine the foundations of all morality, or some would say then President Reagan shouldn't enter into anything. Well, I side with him on that he's trying to enter into it in terms of letting it be to the Russians' advantage to keep the treaty. But all those things, you say, am I absolutely certain? No, but I'm absolutely certain that the Lamb is on the throne. The Lamb is in control of everything. Then, you know, you have your own little ideas, and you get a little fun, you know, talking about your own ideas. You come back and say, but don't prove too much by that. Doesn't prove anything. The Lamb on the throne, that's the proof of everything. So study chapter 6 to 19, the life of God's unchanging character. Are we in the last days? Yeah. Daniel wasn't. Seal up the book. He wasn't in the last days. We're in the last days. John, seal not up the book. Time's at hand. And the time is at hand in this present age, leading on to the second coming of the Lord. On page 34, the great central message of chapter 7, verses 1 to 17. From your study of Revelation 7, through the use of as many reference works as you deem necessary, state clearly and discuss in detail what you believe to be the central message of this wonderful chapter. You'd be aided in your answer if you show how chapter 7 is related to the central message of the book of Revelation. The central message of chapter 7 can be expressed in these words: the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. Completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. You'll notice the way I've stated it has 7 words in it. And it's from chapter 7. Well, you may remember it that way. Now, that doesn't mean that my use of the number 7 is symbolic, because I've just got 7 words in it the way I stated it. Of course, mine's not inspired. And it's chapter 7. Well, man has arranged the chapter divisions in the Bible. Originally, they didn't have chapter divisions in the original manuscript. But it's a way to remember it if you want to. But chapter 7, 7 words. The completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. Now, there's quite an eschatological battleground here between the pre-tribs and the post-tribs and so forth in the 7th chapter of Revelation. And I think often in interpreting it, we lose sight of the central message of the chapter as a whole. Be sure you get that central message. And then you come to take the individual parts of it. In this chapter, I have found 3 illustrations of the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. The first illustration is the word every, which is used. It occurs 3 times in this 7th chapter, the word every. The King James translates it all. See, it's the same Greek word. They just put it in the plural. The ASV of 1901, every, is pas upon, the Greek word every or all. It's singular or plural, and here it occurs both in the singular and in the plural in one of the verses. Chapter 7, verse 4. Sealed out of every tribe of the children of Israel. You see the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. Regardless of your interpretation of this particular passage, who are these representatives of the 12 tribes? One thing's clear. The Lamb's redemptive work is complete. The every tribe of the children of Israel. Then Revelation 7:9. Revelation 7:9, a great multitude which no man could number, out of every nation and of all tribes and peoples and tongues. See, the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. And then chapter 7, verse 17, the last verse of the chapter. God shall wipe away every tear from their eye. You see that central message all the way through. And whatever you take as the interpretation of the earlier passage, come back to this, which is absolutely clear. The Lamb is working a complete redemptive work. The second illustration of the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work is the numbers 12,000 and 144,000. 12,000 from each one of the 12 tribes, 144,000 in all. Now you see, those are complete numbers. Complete numbers. For example, do you realize that since we're in 1988, we're only 12 years away from the turn of the millennium? Not just the turn of the century, but the turn of the millennium. This is only the second one since the death of Christ. The first turn of the millennium was in 1000 AD. The second will be in 2000 AD, and we're only 12 years away from that. Now suppose somebody would die about 1997, or 1998, or 1999, and even a few days before the turn of the millennium. Many would either consciously or unconsciously have the idea, oh, it seems so incomplete. Why couldn't he have lived on to 2000? See, that number, the 1,000, that's a complete number. That's a complete number. And I think that's the main significance of this. When you compare these tribes of Israel in Revelation 7 with the Old Testament, you find a big divergence. Some of the tribes were much larger, much smaller than others. Big difference between them. But they all have the same number here. And I think it would indicate that it's used symbolically. Now just how you would apply the symbolism of it is a question all its own, but used symbolically. And that's the second indication of the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. 12,000 out of every one of the 12 tribes, 144,000. What do you get out of that? Someone say, oh, now I'm not sure. I'm sure that the Lamb's redemptive work is going to be complete. You can be absolutely sure of that. Then you see, when you get absolutely sure about something, then you allow for elasticity of somebody different from you on a little point. I want to tell you, there's some folks who will literally chop your head off if you don't agree with them in every little point on something. The third illustration of the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work is the word temple. The word temple in the 15th verse. Listen to Revelation 7:15. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth on the throne shall spread his tabernacle over them. The Greek word for temple, which occurs in Revelation 7:15, occurs 16 times in Revelation. And it's always the same Greek word. Two of the chief Greek words for temple are the word hieron, H-I-E-R-O-N, and naos, N-A-O-S. Hieron is the less intimate word of the two. Hieron refers to the whole temple enclosure, includes the court of the Gentiles, includes everything. Naos refers to the sanctuary. The sanctuary included the holy place and the holy of holies. You see what he's saying here? Tremendous thing. He's saying that those who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, who are they? Now what? They're from every tribe of Israel and from a great multitude which no man could number, out of every nation and of all tribes and peoples and tongues. And what? They serve him day and night in his holy of holies. See the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. When his redemptive work is complete, all the redeemed people of God are going to be in the holy of holies. I would take that as figurative language. Of course, you know, there's the question of interpretation about eschatology. Will the temple be rebuilt in Jerusalem? Now, some think that the Jews will go back to Palestine in unbelief. And going back in unbelief, they will rebuild the temple and therefore revive the blood sacrifice. Well, that could be true. I take a 100% stand on this. That the blood sacrifices will never be revived inside the will of God. When I come to this, I tell my students, I'm not an amillennialist, but I'd rather be an amillennialist than to believe that the blood sacrifices are going to be revived. I think it contradicts Hebrews. It contradicts the message of the Bible. Christ has fulfilled all that. And in the will of God, the blood sacrifice is not going to be revived. I take 100% stand on that. Now, whether or not the Jews in unbelief rebuild the temple and revive the sacrifice, this is another question. I take an absolute stand on that. But in the meaning, the real meaning of the thing, you see, those from all the tribes, well, how about in Old Testament times? Could those from all the tribes go into the Holy of Holies? No. Even the tribe of Levi couldn't do it completely. See, it's only those from the line of Aaron inside the tribe of Levi that could go into the holy place. And then once a year on the great day of atonement, only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies to see the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work all the way to the Holy of Holies and have intimate fellowship with the Lord. Let me mention one verse which helps me to lay hold on the central message of this chapter, which is the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. And that, John 6:37. It's often used as a great personal worker's verse, and indeed it is. But it's more than that. John 6:37. Him that cometh unto me, I will in no wise cast out. I know when I took personal evangelism many years ago, I memorized the second part of that. Him that cometh unto me, I will in no wise cast out. But notice the first part. Jesus said, all that the Father giveth me shall come unto me. And him that cometh unto me, I will in no wise cast out. All that the Father giveth me shall come unto me, and him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out. Now, I was reading the other day a book on evangelism, and some of these books have tremendous truth in them and also tremendous error. A lot of the emphasis on evangelism is a conglomerate mixture of truth and error. It's not the whole counsel of God. Much of it isn't. And the book was just saying, well, here's this person who was under my ministry, and then he died without Christ. Well, now, how much am I to blame? How much am I to blame? And you know, you can be blaming yourself so that you neglect what God set before you now. Right now. And I say, yes, I just confess that as a sin, but it doesn't nullify this, that all that the Father giveth him will come unto him. And you notice, it says, all that the Father giveth me shall come unto me. See the difference? Our translators have not made it a simple future. Will. That'd be simple future. All that the Father giveth me will come. No, shall. It's determined. It's determined. It's determined by God that all that the Father giveth Christ shall come unto him. I like to relate that also. I believe we got an amen back there, didn't we? So happy to have her back again. Moral support. He said that, moral support. Hebrews 9 says, he shall appear the second time. See, the translators haven't rendered it. Will appear, simple future. Shall appear. He's determined to appear. You look out on the world and you say, oh, how can God's redemptive plan for this present age be complete? He's determined. When it's complete for this present age, you see some say the church, the body of Christ, must be complete. I'm glad for you to use that if you want to. I don't use it because it introduces you to a question. Will those who are saved after Christ returns be a part of the church? See, some premillennialists say no, some say yes. But I just take it common denominator. God's redemptive plan, saving souls in this present age, must be complete before Christ can return. How could that be? All that the Father giveth me shall come unto me. He shall appear the second time. I tell you folks, it makes a difference in your soul. Instead of going around always saying, I could have done more. Well, I tell you, any time in my life I could say I could have done more. But I'm not to walk a tightrope in evangelism or anything else. I'm to trust the Lord and be happy in the Lord. And you're to be happy in the Lord, and some emphasis on evangelism tries to make you perfectly miserable so you'll do more soul winning. It's not the way to do it. Well, one of your great appeals to people is your joy in the Lord. That's one of your great appeals. You go around moping, oh, I failed in that. Feeling, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You know, God not only gives words to say, but He also gives silence sometimes. And I think some who emphasize soul winning teach you to open your mouth too much. You just always ought to say something. You know, in a group one time, a fellow told me later, he didn't say anything. He said, I just believe the Lord gave me silence. Well, that's important. I heard one time of a man who knew 7 different languages. Somebody was talking and said, "My, it's remarkable." And I said, "Yeah, but what do you find remarkable about it?" The thing that's remarkable is that he knows 7 different languages. He said, "That's not what's remarkable to me. The thing remarkable to me is he can keep his mouth shut in 7 languages at one time." And the fact is, God can give supernatural silence just as He can give supernatural words. There's no doubt about the fact that by my words sometimes I may have undoubtedly have gone beyond God's will. You say, "Oh, but just so you say something." Oh, not just so you say something. Just so you do the will of God. So you do the will of God. And you see, all that the Father gives me shall come in. Regardless of my failures and your failures, I can rejoice in the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. And I believe that's the great message of this 7th chapter. Then if you emphasize that, then come on back and pick up details and dispute back and forth. That's grand. I love to hear people discuss these things. But if you're absolutely clear on something, it'll keep you from being dogmatic when you shouldn't be. And then you can allow some degree of elasticity. Have you noticed the relation between Revelation 6 and Revelation 7? Revelation 6, the first 6 seals. Judgment. Judgment. Revelation 7, mercy. Mercy. A little judgment, but mainly mercy. You see, where'd you get all this mercy? All the souls saved in Revelation 7. One of the main things God used was judgment. Judgment. And how does God complete His redemptive work? Put these 2 chapters together. Through judgment and mercy. Judgment and mercy. How does He save souls? Individually. Through judgment and mercy. Often we just emphasize mercy. Now you come to the Lord, He has mercy. Yeah, but I want to tell you there's individuals dealing with the Lord that's often brought conviction of sin where the bottom's dropped out of everything. You may call that chastening if you want to, or call it punitive judgment, or whatever you want to call it, but those 2 things go together. And when you pray for your own loved ones, you've got to be willing that God will send the judgment that's needed in order to bring those loved ones to the Lord. Amen. It's completion of God, the Lamb's redemptive work, by judgment and mercy. Chapter 6, mainly judgment. There's at least one little detail of mercy in chapter 6. That's in that 3rd seal where you have the famine. And He tells about these famine prices. But He says, "And the wine and the oil hurt thou not." Well, you see, God, the Lamb, is not giving complete permission to have just a total famine that'll obliterate everything. Well, He says, "Thus far and no farther." You know, that's one thing I love in my own Christian life. God over and over has said to Satan in my life, "Thus far and no farther." And in your life, He said the same thing to Satan time and again, "Thus far and no farther." Well, if you're anything like an honest person, you'd say, I can erect everything right now. Thank the Lord I didn't, because God said to Satan and to my own sinful heart, "Thus far and no farther." The Lamb's in sovereign control. Oh, I love that John 6:37. Because that just, you see, that's in plain matter-of-fact language. Then you bring that plain matter-of-fact language right over into Revelation 7. And you say to me, "Am I absolutely sure of every detail?" No, I'm not. But I'm sure of that one central message, the completeness of the Lamb's redemptive work. Then I just go back to John 6:37. Wonder if that's meant a lot to you thus far in your life. All that the Father giveth me shall come unto me. Habakkuk 3:2, in wrath remember mercy. In wrath remember mercy. Let's have our prayer.
Good or bad, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So there is such a thing as the age of accountability. Now, we don't know how early the child reaches it. One reason the Bible doesn't tell us the exact age is it undoubtedly varies in individual cases. But I'm convinced that the age of accountability is much earlier than most folks think. I've had people ask me, where does the Bible say that 12 years of age is the age of accountability? It nowhere says it. The devil says it. I tell you, Miss Frances Bennett from Moody Bible Institute worked a lot with children. She said she thought she had one clear case where a child 19 months of age was saved. Well, that's mighty early, you say. But I'm convinced it's a whole lot earlier than most folks think. I know one of my students said something that greatly thrilled my heart. He said, I'm not sure how early that age of accountability is, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm just starting with Bible verses and everything on my child before I know whether he can learn them or not. I'm starting right from the beginning. Sure, that's if your heart's really out for the Lord and his full will, you're going to do that. Now, some have asked the question, will there be more in heaven or in hell throughout the eternal ages? One of the students, members of the class, said to me when I just mentioned this earlier, and I said, now we're going to discuss it later when we come to Revelation 7. He said, I'm looking forward to it. I said, well, don't expect too much yet because it'll be a long time before we come to it. But here we are now in Revelation chapter 7. I want to show you how a Bible interpreter arrives at the conclusion that there will be far more in heaven than in hell if he accepts two things. Now, all who believe the Bible will know that great multitudes will be in heaven. It won't be a lonely kind of place. Great multitudes will be there. But will far more be in heaven than in hell. And if he accepts first the doctrine of universal infant salvation, that is, that every baby dying in infancy is saved through the precious blood of Christ and will be present in heaven forever, if he accepts that doctrine of universal infant salvation. Then the second thing, if he accepts premillennialism. It isn't my purpose to go into all the details. We'll get more of that later when we come to it. But for any of you, if some of this is technical, remember, often you pick up these things gradually. Here's a term, I don't know it yet, and I can't stop and go into detail. One reason is I don't know too much about some of these things myself. But premillennialism, one big difference between premillennialism and amillennialism is that amillennialism is so not nobody will be saved after Christ returns. See, the earth will be burned up, and that'll be the end. Nobody will be saved after he comes again. Premillennialism teaches that many will be saved after Christ comes again. All right, now, according to this, there will be three groups of human beings who will be in heaven throughout the eternal ages. The first consists of all infants who die in infancy or in the prenatal state. All infants who die in infancy or in the prenatal state. They're human souls saved through the precious blood of Christ. Many recognize the fact that more than half the human race has died in infancy. In that one group you have more in heaven than in hell, if universal infant salvation is true. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's no absolute proof of this in the Bible, and it's a wonderful thing that it isn't. Not only are the words of the Bible inspired, but the silences are inspired. And if God had come right out in so many words and said every baby dying in infancy or in the prenatal state goes to heaven, boy, you know what man would have done with that. So the Bible has to hide some of what God does. I personally think that Romans 5:18 is the greatest single verse concerning universal infant salvation. Some have the idea that Calvinists aren't supposed to accept it because some Calvinists believe in partial infant salvation and partial infant damnation. But Charles Hodge is considered to be the greatest interpreter of Calvinism. And he interpreted it as meaning universal infant salvation. My understanding is he's the first one to make very prominent in American theology the doctrine of universal infant salvation. Now, in some parts of the heathen world, as much as 7/8 of the human race has died in infancy because partly of unsanitary, filthy conditions. Many babies have died because of filthy conditions, because of human sacrifice. Oh, you're horrified. People burn their babies as sacrifice to their gods. But if universal infant salvation is true, all those babies who go through that go to heaven. Tremendous thing. See, surely the wrath of man shall praise thee. You say, am I in favor of human sacrifice? Absolutely not. The Bible clearly says no. You're murdering that baby. Don't offer him as a sacrifice to God. Go to the story of Abraham and Isaac, and you see how God intervened in that whole thing to reveal what his will was. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. And it's a tremendous thing to realize. I mentioned to you earlier, then of course, in addition to the human sacrifice, you have the murder of girl babies. In many countries, particularly in China, they've murdered many girl babies. And you say, terrible, yeah, but God makes the wrath of man to praise him. And those babies probably would have grown up and rejected the Lord. But they're in heaven, saved through the blood of Christ. All who die in the prenatal state between conception and birth will be in heaven throughout the eternal ages. And all who die in infancy will be present. You know how many children Susanna Wesley had? She's the mother of the Wesleys. 19 children. But often when people tell about it, they say she had 10 children. Because of her 19 children, 9 died in infancy. 9 died in infancy. You see, John Wesley was the 16th of 19. And Charles Wesley was 4 years younger than John. And those two great Wesleys came way along the end of the line. I heard a speaker one time say, of course, humor in it, brought a lot of humor. They knew what he meant. He said, I'm so glad my mother didn't believe in abortion. Because if she believed in abortion, look what the world would have missed. He had pointed to himself. Yeah, if Susanna Wesley had believed in abortion, look at what the world would have missed, John Wesley and Charles Wesley. See how tremendous that is. You see, that gives you the other side of the same truth. Remember what we need, the whole counsel of God, not merely concerning all the truths of the Bible, but the whole counsel concerning every subject in the Bible. And oh, how all important it is to get into that. One of the reasons I don't join hands with groups that fight abortion is not that I don't believe abortion's sin. It doesn't change my stand, but it changes my emphasis. Changes my emphasis. You see a lot of these signs, the right to live. The right to live, that's part of it. The other part is the privilege of living in heaven forever. That's the other part of it. And you just know on the law of averages that a lot of these who are aborted would have grown up in sin and gone to hell. And you say, well, Mr. Sellers, you don't take a stand. I take a stand. Thou shalt not murder, God says. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. Abortion's murder. But it changes my emphasis. And I wish some of these who lead the anti-abortion forces would spend a little more time studying the Bible and spend a little more time praying to the Lord. Do you realize we talk about now this is nonviolent demonstration? No demonstration is nonviolent. Every demonstration is potentially violent. Potentially violent. What are those other folks going to do to this group? It's all potentially violent. No such thing as a nonviolent demonstration. They use that word, but it's not. It's all violent. And boy, God can engineer all this without my trying to ruin what he's doing. And he makes the wrath of man to praise him. My, what a tremendous thing that is. Just think of all, of course people often ask, will babies grow up in heaven? You've heard that question. Well, I think that's very much settled, but they that are Christ at his coming will receive resurrection bodies. And all these babies receive resurrection bodies. And, you say, what's going to be the size? The size of the body isn't the thing. Babies have ignorance and helplessness. In their resurrection body, they ain't going to have any ignorance. They're not going to have any helplessness. See, it'll all be done. We just begin to know a little bit about the souls that will be present in heaven. The infinite God knows. And all, again, you say, well, evangelism is important. Yeah, evangelism is important, but evangelism is not the whole thing, brother. Evangelism is not the whole thing. Up at Ben Lippin, I don't think we ever had a conference on evangelism. We had Bible and Christian life conferences, and evangelism was strong in it, but it was a part of the whole thing. And some evangelism is not a part of the whole thing, it's just the whole thing. Evangelism is not the whole thing, brother. The sovereign God's the whole thing. Sovereign God's the whole thing. Then when you get your eyes on Him, it gives you joy. Oh, maybe I didn't say the right thing. Oh, you preachers, are you ever tormented by that after Sunday? They often talk about Blue Monday for the preacher. Oh, I butchered that thing. Oh, I just can't be happy for the rest of the week. I can be happy in the Lord right now because I'm trusting Him. I'm not trusting my record. I'm trusting Him. And then you say, well, good, then you won't be interested in your record. Yes, you will too. Where one part of the Bible truth fills your soul, the other parts will come in too. And no scriptural truth contradicts any other scriptural truth. All right, that's the first group of human beings who will be present in heaven. All babies who've died in infancy and all who've died in the prenatal state, lost by misconception or by abortion. Why, I wonder if somebody asked Susanna Wesley how many children she had. 19. Not 10, 19. And she's not sure that all the others are saved at the 10. Because you see, 3 of those were boys. One was Samuel Wesley, named for his father. And then the others, John and Charles. 7 of them were girls. And some of those girls had very unhappy marital experiences. Their husbands were unfaithful, and really they were just wretched. And whether they were saved or not, I don't know. I've got a little book that I advise you very much called Anecdotes of the Wesleys. Lets you in on the inside a lot of interesting things there. Wow, those were mighty men of God. But she's got 9, if universal infant salvation is true, she has 9 that are surely in heaven. And then of those 10, I think it's kind of a chance that John Wesley might make it, don't you? And Charles Wesley might be there, Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly. The second group of human beings who will be in heaven throughout the eternal ages consists of those who will be saved after the coming of Christ. Many will be saved after the coming of Christ. One of the clearest passages in the Bible concerning this is in Romans 11. Now, Romans 11 is a great key passage to help you to interpret the Old Testament prophets when they prophesy what's going to come. You say, how much of that is figurative language and how much is literal? Come to Romans 11, because Romans 11 uses plain, matter-of-fact language. Plain, matter-of-fact language. And 2 verses, Romans 11:26, along with Romans 11:12. Romans 11:26 says, and so all Israel shall be saved. Even as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer. He shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. The Jewish nation as a whole, living on earth when Christ returns, will accept Him as Messiah and Lord. I believe that's what the Bible is clearly teaching. Jewish nation as a whole. That doesn't mean every single Jew. But you see, when He came the first time, the Jewish nation rejected Him. Well, not every individual Jew rejected Him. There's the remnant. Just so there will be a remnant to reject Him. But the nation as a whole will accept Him when He comes again. And then listen to Romans 11:12. If the fall of Israel be the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? Have we Gentiles profited in salvation by Israel's fall? Yes. Well, how much more will Gentiles profit through Israel's fullness when the nation as a whole accept Him? Now, don't wait to accept that till you can fit it exactly into your scheme. You say that's going to happen here and happen there. It's all right to ask that when it's going to happen, but remember, some of those details aren't absolutely clear, but this is absolutely clear. I take 100% stand on that. All Israel shall be saved, and if the fall of Israel be the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness. This is worldwide conversion. The world as a whole will one day be converted. I believe that's after the coming of Christ. Now, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. Matthew 24:14. Worldwide evangelism, worldwide witness. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be converted. But the world as a whole will be converted after Christ returns. Now you see, you've got your two groups there that are very clear. The first, if universal infant salvation is true, how many more will be in heaven than in hell? And then all those saved after the coming of Christ. Then the third group of human beings in heaven throughout the eternal ages will be those who've received Christ as Savior from Adam to the return of Christ. Those who receive Christ as Savior from Adam to the return of Christ. Of course, they've reached the age of accountability. Although Matthew 7:13 and 14 says there will be relatively few in this group. Broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many go in thereat. Narrow is the way that leads to life, few there be that find it. Although Matthew 7:13, 14 says there will be relatively few in that group, there will still be myriads in that group who've accepted Christ as Savior from Adam's sin unto the return of Christ. Dr. Norman Harrison was not a man given to extreme statements or estimates, but his estimate was this. He said, out of every 100 people in the world today, those who've reached the age of accountability, how many will be in hell forever? His estimate was 96 out of 100 will be in hell forever. Well, that's man's estimate. God's the only one who knows absolutely. But some folks would be horrified at anything like that, while a lot of folks would guess way up there. And you know how much I think of Dr. McQuilkin and how much I quote him and all. It left an indelible imprint in my life. But you ask yourself this question, is there any place where he and I differ on things? There's one is this, and I don't mean he went to the extreme of some who say that, oh, most of the human race will be in heaven. I mean of those who've reached the age of accountability. But he thought more folks were saved than I do. Just accept him. His profession. Well, the Lord doesn't say by their profession ye shall know them. It says by their fruits. By their fruits ye shall know them. And that's one difference between my view and the view of my beloved life companion. She thinks more folks are saved and going to heaven than I do. See? Well, you can see it comes from that loving heart. He said, oh, that's a wonderful Christian. And I don't respond. You know? Hub, you think that's a wonderful Christian? I said, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, but look at that letter. Yeah? But that letter could mean something else. I don't know. But that's not sufficient fruitage. You see what I mean? And I'm glad to differ. Of course, when I get to heaven, I'll tell Dr. McQuilkin how wrong he's been, you know, and how right. You see, one reason I try to mention these things is to let you know, some folks think if you differ on anything, you just hate the person. No, I'm trying to get what the Bible teaches. I'm trying to. And disagreement? Now, if any of you disagree with me on anything, I know you're wrong. So, no, I'm glad to, just so you'll have a heart hungry for what God says. Some just, they won't even listen to reason. You give this scripture. All right, now the next thing I want you to notice is this, they'll say. Completely ignore that scripture. I don't want that. But 96 out of 100, that was his estimate. And so if you think, well, if so many are going to be in heaven, I don't need to do much in evangelism. See the complete message here. If 96 out of every 100 in the world are going to hell, there's plenty of work for me to do. Plenty of work for you to do. All right, that's how I would reconcile the seeming contradiction between Revelation 7 9 and 10, and Matthew 7, 13, 14. Review it. Matthew 7, 13, 14 is speaking of those in the present dispensation. See, that is before the second coming of Christ, who have reached the age of accountability. So you have those three groups present in heaven forever. Let me ask, how many of you, although you don't have absolute proof for it, incline strongly to the doctrine of universal infant salvation? Good to see your hand. Christians in general do. And you don't have to spend too much time on it. It's not my purpose to go into great detail, but I just come and say, I'm glad there isn't an absolute proof. It'd be awful if you had an absolute proof. Because people kill babies, and they'd abort children and everything for it. But when you leave that aside, God's in sovereign control of every abortion. Don't forget it. In sovereign control. It makes a big difference the way you read the newspapers. Do you read the newspapers victoriously or in a defeated manner? Oh, look at this. I want to tell you, just nothing can happen before the Lord comes. What about all those who are aborted being in heaven? I won't tell you, there's an awful lot in that number. You know, there's a place right near my doctor's office. My doctor retired recently and he said just one reason I knew that was that one night he had a break-in at his office. He said they broke in here and then they broke in right over there at that abortion clinic. He said, you can see it right across the way. And he said, isn't that sad? He said, in the early part of my work as a doctor, why, only the worst kind of freak would ever practice abortion. No reputable doctor would do it. But look at it now. Terrible. Terrible. But the sovereign God's in control of all that. Keep your eyes on the Lamb. The Lamb on the throne. On page 35, the doxologies which are contained in the first 7 chapters of Revelation. Read carefully the following doxologies in the first 7 chapters of Revelation. Mention and discuss in detail any general impression which you form from the above-mentioned doxologies. Let me mention 2. The first one now and the next one a week from tonight. The first general impression, in order to have it, I want you to write these words in the left-hand margin. Come up to top, chapter 1, verse 6. And in the left-hand margin, write twofold praise. Twofold praise. Unto him be the glory and the dominion. Twofold praise. And then 4:9. In the margin, threefold praise. Glory and honor and thanks to him that sitteth on the throne. And then by 4:11, threefold praise. The glory and the honor and the power. Threefold praise. Then 5:12, sevenfold praise. Worthy is the Lamb that hath been slain to receive the power and riches and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Sevenfold praise. 5:13, unto him that, fourfold praise. Unto him that sitteth on the throne and unto the Lamb be the blessing and the honor and the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Then 7:12, sevenfold praise. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto our God forever and ever. What is your general impression that you form from that? See, generally, the praise note deepens. Generally, the praise note deepens. Twofold praise, threefold praise, threefold praise, sevenfold praise, fourfold praise, sevenfold praise. Generally, the praise note deepens. Dr. Fleece at the Ben Lippen conferences used to pray a lot for a rising tide of blessing on the conference ground. We used to have 3 main conferences in the summer, in July and August, and that there'd be a rising tide of blessing, and I tell you there was. God did tremendous works, there's just no doubt about it. You heard me talk about Dan Graham. Well, Dan Graham's son-in-law was saved up at Ben Lippen. And that's just one little indication of it. Some would say, deeper life up there. No, Christian life. But they say you don't get souls saved when you have that. Ben Lippen got a lot saved, there's no doubt about it. And it's a tremendous thing. But he used to pray for a rising tide of blessing. All right, now, here in these doxologies, you have a rising tide of praise. And it's God's will that we have that. We're in January now. If our class goes through the year in the will of God, we're going to have a rising tide of praise. We'll praise Him more and more all through the year. All through the year. That's very different from New Year's resolutions that are made to be broken. Yeah, he made a New Year's resolution, but he broke it on January 10th and the rest of the year. No, that's the opposite of God's plan. Rising tide of praise. If you keep your eyes on the Lamb on the throne, there will be a rising tide of praise. And how much praising God do you do? I don't mean always just in verbs, but the whole atmosphere of your life. I told you that what somebody said of Dr. McQuilkin when he died. I was up at a camp in New York State, and I heard that he died and told other Bible college students about it. One of them said, it just gave you a lift to be around him. Does your life even begin to do that? To give others a lift. Give others a lift. Oh, I want to tell you, the world's in such sad state. And look at this election that's coming up. Yeah, but the Lamb's on the throne. I'm not even sure whom I'm for right now in the whole thing. I don't know whether you are or not. I'm glad I don't vote today. Of course, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to vote for the pro-communist party. I have to bring my politics in somewhere along the line, you know. I hope I'll drive some of you away. And